Hi, my name is Preeti Fernando. Today I will talk about virtual emotional intelligence. Many of us spend our working time from behind a screen. You may be working remotely, you may be working hybrid, and you may be working from a laptop, a computer, or some kind of screen. And virtual emotional intelligence is my reference to how our emotional intelligence unfolds in the screen online space. So, here are some qualities that you would find in someone practicing virtual emotional intelligence in the online space. They know which method of communication to use with which person appropriately. What do I mean by that? Not everyone works well from behind a screen. Not everyone comes across effectively from an email. Sometimes emails, text messages can lead to misunderstandings simply because one person is not really good at typing out an email and communicating their feelings or thoughts effectively in the online space. So people practicing virtual emotional intelligence know they ask themselves first, I wonder if it's better to pick up the phone and call this person rather than working through this matter through emails. Two, they know that emails, Zooms, and text alerts can sometimes fail. In other words, we assume when we send out a text that other person gets it. So we assume that. Depending on the matter, and sometimes it could be a confidential matter, sometimes it could be a sensitive matter, depending on the situation at hand and what is being addressed, if you don't get a response right away from the other person, or if you don't get a response at all, it can lead to serious misunderstanding. It can also lead to damaged relationships. Did we ever pause to think that that text message may not have reached the other person? That has happened to me in the past. Or their phone may have died. They may have lost the phone. Once that happened to me, I sent a text message and I never heard back from the person. It was a sensitive, time sensitive matter. And it led to misunderstanding, and I didn't feel comfortable calling that person over the phone because I have been communicating with that person via text. So I didn't really follow up with a phone call or a face-to-face meeting thinking that person was not interested or they were offended by the text message. Months later, I bumped into that person accidentally on the street, and it turns out that person had lost their phone. Well, lost means the phone got damaged and they got a brand new phone with a brand new number, and that person gave me their new number. So it was that may not happen all the time. Not everyone loses their phone and get brand new numbers. They transfer their old number, but that is a possibility. So when we are virtually emotionally intelligent, we don't always assume 100% that the text message or the email reaches the other person. Sometimes with emails, if they have a certain security barrier on the email, your email may not go through and you may not get a return to sender delivery failure notice either. That's happened to me also, and that may have happened to you also. 3, virtual emotionally intelligent people or people practicing virtual emotional intelligence hit the pause button. They take a step back before they embark on any kind of email escalation wars. What do I mean by email escalation wars? If you have engaged in any of those email wars, email battles, you know what I mean by that. Have you ever had that experience where you send seemingly you don't think twice about it. You send an email to someone Monday morning, and that person comes back with an email upping it, and then you get agitated, so you send an email back to get your last word in. They send an email back that's even longer with more links to get and bringing up things from the past because they have to get the last word in and they have to be right. Before you know it, this email war has begun. And we lose sight of the main issue at hand, and sometimes it could be something very simple. But the email, now we have gotten entangled in the whole wording about the word choice someone used, and so you have to now go after that word choice, or it's a situation taken out of context, and it's all blown out of proportion in email wars. People practicing virtual emotional intelligence think twice. They hit the pause button to ask themselves, is it worth my time? Is it worth my energy to get involved, to get wrapped up around this email war? 4. People with virtual emotional intelligence think before they hit send, pause before they hit post. If it's their social media, they pause before they hit post, because they know what they post online can haunt them 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years, 30 years later, depending on the wording of that, depending on the context and what is being discussed. They think before they hit send. Think before you hit send on those emails. I know in the past I have sent emails in an emotionally charged moment, and they have created damage in the past. And whenever I can now, I try to think before I hit send, especially on sensitive emails, especially if you know that the receiver tends to blow things out of proportion. If the person reading that email on the other end is neurotic, they can be overly sensitive, or they may have some kind of previous incident with you, and this particular word choice that you might use, or one word that you might use in that email, if someone else sent that email, they may not misread it, they may not misunderstand it, but because it's coming from you and because of that previous experience or incident, they are going to get, their minds could get spinning around it. And you could start something that you never even anticipated. So think before you hit send, pause before you hit post. People practicing virtual emotional intelligence know when it is time to quit sending 20, 30, 40 emails back and forth on one matter, and to pick up the phone and call that other person, or to schedule a 10-minute face-to-face meeting with that other person. They have a good understanding of when it is time to stop exchanging emails back and forth. Here's the reasoning why. When we practice healthy emotional intelligence in the virtual space, in virtual communications such as emails, we appreciate time. Emotionally intelligent people appreciate and value time. They can see that exchanging 20, 30 emails in small snippets, yes, no, maybe, can I get back to you on this next week? And then next week comes, and then the other person doesn't receive the email till next Thursday because they don't work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or they don't check their emails. So by the time they get it on Thursday and write back to you on Thursday, you have taken Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday off, and you look at it on Tuesday, and you have to look at the previous list, the previous correspondence of the context, because you're dealing with so many clients. So many things that lead to time waste. I look back at some of the communications that I've had over emails, and I see what a time waste they were. That because we have become so comfortable communicating through emails, when you look back, especially if you are not emotionally involved in those emails, and you, after a time has elapsed and that matter has been taken care of, and you review some of those email exchanges, you realize what a time waste those were. You could have saved potentially hundreds of hours between typing emails, between the thinking time, between reviewing the previous emails that were discussed about it. With all that, it could potentially be hundreds of hours that could have been addressed through a 15-minute phone call. That has happened to me, and it has not been up to me. Usually in those situations there is also hierarchy dynamic, and sometimes you may not be the person to make that call, to step up and say, you know what, let's get on a phone call. Let's have lunch for 20 minutes to discuss this. That way we don't have to exchange emails back and forth, and emails could also lead to misunderstandings on this matter. You may not be in that position, given the situation, given the relationship, to make that call or to make that suggestion, in which case you have to go with what the other person is doing. Some people get offended if you tell them, let's just not do emails, it's a waste of time, let's do a phone call or a Zoom session. Some people get offended when you step up and make a suggestion like that. If that's the case, don't make those suggestions. You have to go with the flow. That's why we are talking about virtual emotional intelligence, because someone practicing virtual emotional intelligence know that emails are not necessarily the best way on every single occasion, that sometimes it can be a disastrous time waste. It can also lead to misunderstandings when we use emails for some matters pertaining to work or pertaining to our personal lives as well. People practicing virtual emotional intelligence have consistency in their communications. Consistency. Say it with me. Consistency. They are consistent. You may have the experience of dealing with a coworker, a supervisor, or a client, or someone at a personal level, a board member. You know when you send them an email, they are going to get back to you either within an hour or within the course of a day or within the course of 2 to 3 days. You know that. They're not going to leave you hanging. And then you also know someone, when you send them an email, if it's something not to their liking or something they can't be bothered getting involved in, or they just can't be bothered even reading, getting back to you on it, you may not hear from them at all. Now, sometimes this doesn't matter, but sometimes it does, because you don't know where that person stands on that matter. And if you don't hear back from them and you go ahead and do something or make a decision, then they might come back and say, hey, why didn't you, I needed to be informed about it. And then if you come back and say, well, I did send you an email, that person can get offended depending on the relationship between the two of you. They could have you potentially fired, or they could create divisions in the office over that matter. So many things, simply because they're not consistent in their communications. People practicing virtual emotional intelligence are consistent in their communications. You have a general idea, this person is going to get back to me. This person is not just going to leave me hanging or tell me later on that they never got the email. Have you had that happen when it's something sensitive or something that you really need their input or their attention or their follow-up or their decision? They don't want to get involved, so the way they deal with it is by not saying anything, and later on if you bring it up, they'll say it went to spam. You ever had that happen? So consistency in their communication. People practicing virtual emotional intelligence, whenever they can, they keep their video on during meetings, especially if it's a meeting between two people. If it is a webinar and there are 100 people signed up for that webinar, for that Zoom call, I understand all 100 may not have their video on, and they may be listening to that webinar while they are having their toddler on their lap. They're sitting on the bed. They're not dressed right. Their hair is messy, so they don't want to have the Zoom video on. I understand that. If it is between one-on-one, it's just two people, between yourself and the other person, I would say, if you're practicing virtual emotional intelligence, to have that video on. Now, you might think that's odd. Every time I have a Zoom meeting with someone, if it's the other person, they always have it on. Not necessarily. I have had an experience where it was myself and someone else. I've actually had it happen a couple of times where the other person didn't have their video on, and it made me feel as though I wasn't important. It made me feel as though my meeting wasn't important. It made me feel like that person didn't care enough to have their video on. And I'm giving my fullest to that meeting, and that other person, it could, especially if it's someone you have never met and you're discussing something, you want to have some kind of authenticity. That authentication comes, that verification comes when they have their video on, and not just the headshot, not a static headshot. I mean a live person talking. So people practicing virtual emotional intelligence have their video on when possible. And again, this does not apply if you're listening to a webinar or a staff training and there are 100 people and 90 of them don't have their videos on. It doesn't apply in that case. But if it's 2 to 3 people, I would say have your video on. People practicing virtual emotional intelligence pay attention to their word choice. They pay attention to their word choice in online communications, during Zoom calls, in how they type out their emails or their social media posts. They try to keep the day-to-day slang out of some of the professional communications. People practicing virtual emotional intelligence know that for some things, a screen can be disastrous, that for some things, you have to do it in person, face to face. Nothing can give that same level of quality as face to face. So they know, in order to get the maximum result, they know when to discard entirely the screen and online space and to stick to that good old-fashioned face to face. So those were 10 qualities that that are typically embraced by people practicing virtual emotional intelligence. Please visit my website at preethifernando, preethifernando.com, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, Lidista, and you can also join me on LinkedIn. I'm Preethi Fernando on LinkedIn. Send me an invite, and I look forward to connecting with you, and you can see a lot of free information on my website and on LinkedIn as well. I speak on emotional intelligence, on work-life balance, on mindfulness, on mental health and wellness, and a variety of other topics that you can see on my website at preethifernando.com. Thank you for listening. I wish each and every one of you good health, peace of mind, financial prosperity. This is Preethi Fernando.